Historical erasure. Historical erasure is defined as the deliberate act of ignoring the deliberate act of ignoring, downplaying, or falsifying historical events to manipulate a collective narrative for political or ideological purposes. History books is full of names: Washington, Edison, Lincoln, but there are tons of names that we haven't heard of. Claudette Colvin, for example. She was the first woman to she was in the front of the bus long before Rosa Parks, or Louis Latimer, who invented the light bulb filament. Too often are people of color written out of textbooks in history. For years, people of color, today I'm talking about Black Americans, have been written out or erased from history, which creates an incomplete idea or example of what history really is and what has shaped our nation. When we think of these cultures that have been erased, it doesn't just affect textbooks, it affects the way of life, how people view each other, how young people grow up, and how we view ourselves and each other. As college students, we depend on this history to continue our generation as well as to educate the generations behind us. I am African American and Native American, and within my family, there's not a lot of history behind where we've come from. A lot of the history within my family died with the matriarch of our family recently this year or this month. And so now we're looking for history that is really lies within memories that doesn't really exist. So today I'm going to be discussing the constant erasure of people of color within history, how this comes from systemic racism through the point of view of the critical race theory, and how we can fight back against this erasure. So now that you understand the personal and the societal issues, let's look at how the erasure of people of color has been affected in stories that we are told and the ones that we are not. So people of color have been erased or downplayed throughout history, in historical narratives and educational cultura and public memory. So according to ashwagandha and contributors from 2023 journal, Call for Inclusion in APA Curriculum, although curriculum and taught in graduate programs includes content related to multicultural psychology, there's typically no exposure to African American psychology. Essentially, when it comes to African American psychology stories in our therapy, a lot of times it's told from a Eurocentric point of view and it's not told from our point of view. So a lot of our history is warped to one that is not particularly what we actually went through. According to Smith and contributors in a 2024 journal called Correcting Racist Epistemic Injustices in LIS, it basically talks about how complex stories have been tainted by racism, and how the collections of documents and info and materials and stories have been collected over previous generations, but have missed or unintentionally have missed intentionally or unintentionally major information that have created large gaps within history. A lot of times at this point now, it's kind of really insufficient to simply try to go back and collect the missing information, prepare for missing history, because at this point, a lot of his history is just not within memories. So now we've seen how people of color stories are often left out in history books, but it doesn't happen by accident. To understand why these omissions are persistent, we need to look at the deeper structures that shapes our history in the first place. So historical erasure stems from racism embedded in education and cultural institutions. So according to Winston and contributors, but from a journal, The Erasure of Black Social Workers Historically, the critical race theory is defined as a theoretical framework that illuminates the way in which racism and white supremacy are systematically woven in the fabric of policies, laws, and social institutions in society, including higher education. So, according to Ferry, a digital archive and collective memory at a university's Black History in 2024, a lot of times it's seen that some institutions are not able to have Black history archives, while some are. In these cases, the schools that do have them, it's not a lot of information. However, this journal talks a lot about Black history through the point of view of slavery, and how slavery has been the foundation, the growth, and the wealth of many, many institutions, yet the context of slavery is missing from the archives. Clemson, for example, didn't get a Black history or Black literature class until about 8 years ago, which should have been something that was created long, long before then. Knowing how systemic racism drives the historical erasure, the next step is to figuring out what we can do. Fortunately, there are very real and effective ways to combat this. in order to combat the erasure of people of color's uh, history, and maintaining is by maintaining initiatives like the DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, and supporting Black history and cultural museums that commit themselves to personal education about heritage and connection and contributions of people of color. Now, the DEI is the DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Initiative, is a framework that's aimed to create opportunities and environments that embrace a full range of human diversity. So these frameworks are essentially built on the principle that equity and representation are essential rights that uphold the democratic ideas of fairness and opportunism and justice. Now imagine yourself growing up and there not being any history about who you are, where you're from, or anything like that. That is a story for many, many Black Americans and many multicultural Americans all around the country. Personally, for me, I have gone up with a lot of that, but I have had family who has constantly taught me about my history and my past. Another way that you can try to combat this is going to Black history or cultural museums. There are hundreds all around the country, but there are one about 20 minutes from Clemson that you can join, that you can go and visit and learn more about. According to McQueen, with her article, and during the task of Black museums in America, Black museums are more crucial than ever when it comes to teaching, learning, and maintaining the authentic history of people of African descent. These institutions across the nation and beyond work so hard to keep pure records of African Americans, what have they've been through, what they've overcome, and what they're still facing. So far we've seen both problems and its roots and how it's most important, and how each of us can take part in rewriting the narrative. So now we can bring these ideas together and look at what they mean for our future. When we look at people of color today, the idea of constantly being erased in history has been a constant problem. Their accomplishments have been buried under Eurocentric narratives, and the erasure stems from systemic racism based in institutions and the very issue explained by the critical race theory. But we have the power to change that by supporting the DEI and funding Black and cultural museums that actively educating ourselves on the problem. The truth is, people of color aren't forgotten, but they're because they're unimportant, but they're forgotten because their stories were intentionally left out. Recognizing and restoring these stories are essential if we want to continue to move on with our history and reflect on the past. So I challenge each and every one of you to learn about the hidden figures who have shaped our country, question the narratives that you're taught, and support the institutions that preserve these stories. As we flip through history books, the names that we should the names that we know shouldn't be the only ones that matter. It's time to make space for the names we don't hear, like the Claudette Cobbins and the Louis Latimers, the countless others that were erased by memory. If you take anything away from my speech, take away this. By remembering them, we don't just rewrite history, but we reclaim it. Thank you.